Deep in the heart of Romania, beyond the reach of roads or reason, there are glades where the grass grows in strange, scorched circles, where trees lean in just a little too closely, and where, if you listen, you may hear the sound of laughter carried on the wind. But this laughter is not kind. In fact, it is not meant for you at all. It is said that on certain nights, particularly during Rusalim, a time often associated with the Christian holiday known as Pentecost, when the faithful seek guidance in churches, and those wise in the ways of old leave offerings beneath the trees, there are creatures who walk freely between the realms of man and spirit. They are radiant and they are ruthless. They are the Yele. Good evening, and welcome to another captivating episode of Scary Tales, where myths and legends come alive under the moonlit sky. My name is Mr. Rook, your guide through these enigmatic hallowed halls, where we illuminate the obscure and whisper life into the forgotten. Tonight we turn our gaze towards some of the most elusive and beguiling spirits in all of Romanian folklore, the Yele. Their name is rooted in the Romanian pronoun ele, meaning they or them. Curious, is it not, to name something so ancient, so feared and revered with a word that is so impersonal, so deliberately vague, as though to speak their true names would be to invite them in, as though language itself dares not bind what wanders the woods at night. For as you will come to learn this evening, they are indeed breathtakingly beautiful, but they are also unimaginably dangerous. Welcome, dear friends, to Scary Tales. In some corners of Romania, the Yele appear as ethereal maidens cloaked in mist, gliding barefoot through the forest, their hair glowing like starlight, their voices soft as silver bells. In others, they are something less tangible, no more than a gust of wind, a shimmer of heat on the horizon, or a shadow that moves when nothing else does. But whether seen or unseen, they always leave their mark: scorched grass, lost time, or even minds undone. Folklorists have likened them to the Slavic Rusalki, or even to Celtic fairies, those nature spirits who punish arrogance and reward humility. Some scholars have traced their origins back to Thracian priestesses or ancient Dacian goddesses, remnants of a forgotten pantheon, divine, wrathful, but never entirely lost. Still, there are those who say the Yele are something else entirely, not ghosts, not witches, but a presence, a force, a warning, whatever they are. To know them is to risk being known by them in return. In the southern hills of Romania, in the region of Wallachia, the Yele are often spoken of in gentler terms. There they are called the frumoasele, the beautiful ones, but it is done with an air of caution. For beauty alone cannot tame that which cannot be named. They are said to dance barefoot beneath the moonlight, clad in diaphanous gowns, and in some stories, wearing tiny bells at their ankles, bells that do not jingle like those of children, but ring like something distant and old, a sound that lingers in the marrow long after it fades. It is in these enchanted dances that one of their most dangerous powers is revealed, their dominion over time itself. To the Yele, like many of their fey cousins to the north, time is fluid, merciless. In their presence, a single heartbeat may stretch into a year, or a lifetime may vanish in the span of a single song. Yet wherever they dance, the earth remembers, a scorched ring upon the grass, blighted, barren, and wholly avoided. One such ring appeared long ago on a hill above a quiet Wallachian village, and with it a story passed down through the generations. The tale of a shepherd, a melody on the wind, and a dance that would never truly end. There is a hill not far from the village of Brasta, where the grass never grows quite right. Even in spring, when the rest of the valley bursts into luscious life, that patch remains yellowed and brittle, as though it remembers something the rest of the land has tried to forget. Long ago, before roads were paved, when the only light after dusk came from fire or moon, there lived a young shepherd named Dorin, quick of wit, and boasting a confidence that only comes with the naivety of youth. He was the kind of man who whistled into the woods just to see if something would whistle back. Dorin was no fool, but he was curious, and curiosity in the old places can be a dangerous thing. It was the week of Rusalim, a time the elders spoke of with reverence and unease, a time when churches were full of prayer and candlelight, and oak trees hung heavy with offerings, wreaths of wildflowers, bowls of milk, and coins wrapped in red thread. But Dorin remained in the hills, for he had sheep to mind, and pride enough to think himself untouched by old fears. One evening, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, a mist began to rise, thin at first, like breath on a mirror. Dorin's flock soon grew restless. The sheep bleated low, pressing close together, their bodies trembling as though sensing a presence unseen. Dorin tightened his grip on his staff, narrowing his eyes into the mist. He listened for the familiar, the distant howl of a wolf, the snap of a branch beneath a hunter's boot, but there was nothing. No wind, no wolves, not even the birds dared sing. The world had fallen unnaturally still. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. And then it came. A sound so faint it might have been imagined, the delicate chime of a bell, just one, pure and clear, then another, drifting through the mist like a ripple across still water. Dorin turned toward the sound. At the edge of the woods, where the mist pooled like milk in the hollows, he saw them, 3 women, beautiful, their gowns sheer and glistening as though spun from dew, their hair unbound and trailing behind them like smoke. They danced in a slow, hypnotic circle, a horror, ancient and endless, their bare feet gliding across the grass without stirring it. Tiny bells at their ankles chimed with every step, too soft to be merry, too sharp to be kind. Dorin felt the pull immediately. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even desire, it was something deeper, an ache in his bones, a call to something old and wild that lived in the blood long before names and churches. One of the women turned to him. She smiled, a smile as cold as the mist, and beckoned with a single outstretched hand. "Dance with us." Against every whispered warning his grandmother had ever muttered, against every wise tale told beside the hearth, Dorin took a step forward, one step into the ring. The moment his foot crossed the boundary, his whole world changed. The mist thickened, gilded in golden light, the stars above warping like candlelight through glass. The ground beneath him pulsed with a strange rhythm, and so he danced, not because he chose to, but because the choice was no longer his to make. Time unraveled as minutes stretched into eternities, and still he danced. When Dorin finally collapsed at the edge of the clearing, gasping for breath, he discovered not only had the night faded away, but that the whole world had moved on without him. His flock was gone. His cloak was tattered and moth-eaten. His face, reflected in a pool of rainwater, bore lines that had not been there before, and worst of all, his voice was gone. Not a sound, not even a whisper. He stumbled back to the village, and the people who saw him gasped and crossed themselves. For 3 long years had passed since he vanished. Dorin never spoke again. Some say he could not. Others whispered he dared not. For when the wind rose through the hollows at night, they said, you could see him pause and tilt his head, listening for the sound of tiny bells, as if he still heard the music, faint and distant, calling him back. The hill where he vanished remained cursed. Grass refused to grow in the scorched ring where the beautiful ones had danced, and every year on the eve of Rusalim, the villagers would leave offerings at its edge. Milk, honey, wildflowers, and coins bound in red thread, not to honor the beautiful ones, but to plead softly and with all their hearts, leave us be. Poor Dorin thought himself clever for staying behind, too grown to fear bedtime tales, too proud to recognize the silence that comes when old things wake. But the Yele have no use for courage or disbelief. They ask for nothing. They simply call, and by the time you hear their music, it's already too late. And so, every year, the villagers return to that hill, not with axes or torches, no, with milk, with honey, and red-threaded coins offered with trembling hands. Not because they think it will stop the Yele, but because sometimes the best you can do is ask to be spared. But not all wounds are etched in flesh or carved into the mind. Some are sown like seeds by prideful hands in sacred soil. Our next tale takes us to Bukovina, where the Yele do not wait to be seen. They watch, they listen, and when the old laws of the forest are broken, they do not hesitate to strike. This is the story of a farmer, and the price of ploughing where one was never meant to tread. There once lived an old farmer, a man whose back was bent by toil and whose heart was hardened by pride. He had worked the fields all his life, felt every furrow in his bones, counted every harvest by the calluses on his hands. Some said he had a gift, that anything he planted would rise to meet the sun. He knew the land better than anyone, or so he believed, for there was one patch he had never touched, a meadow, fertile and lush near the edge of the forest, where the trees grew tall yet strangely twisted, their roots vanishing into the earth like secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. His grandfather had warned him when he was just a boy, leave that meadow be, it belongs to them. Tear down their trees, the old man whispered by firelight, voice low and cracked, and they'll unravel everything you hold dear. For many years the farmer obeyed, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of fear, but pride is a hungry thing, and he was never satisfied. The old tales began to rot in his mind like spoiled fruit, good enough for old women and frightened children, but not for a man like him. One cloudless morning, with the spring sun glaring like an unblinking eye overhead, the farmer took up his axe and crossed into the forbidden meadow. The trees looked down upon him in silent judgment as the farmer passed beneath them, their knotted limbs creaking softly in the stillness, as though whispering a warning he was too proud to hear. Staring up at one great maple tree, the farmer hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, with a grunt, he swung his axe. The sound of the first blow rang unnaturally sharp across the fields, as if the air itself recoiled. And with every strike, the birds grew quieter, while the earth seemed to pull away from him, shrinking back like a wounded animal. When at last the great maple fell, the ground trembled in protest. But the farmer smiled to himself as he looked at the dark earth underneath, feeling the promise of good soil and strong harvests, and so he continued, felling tree after tree for hours. At long last he turned his back on the fallen trees and made his way home, eager to press seed to soil, never knowing what he'd stirred beneath the roots. That night, a mist bled across the fields, swallowing fences, trees, and trails alike, a mist so thick and unnatural that even the bravest crossed themselves at their doors. Lights, cold and blue, flickered among the stumps. Voices rose on the wind, thin and mournful, singing songs no living tongue could name. In the morning the farmer found his wheat blackened as if by frost, though the air was warm and sweet. His cows shied away from the fields. His hands ached, his joints stiffening, his skin beginning to peel and crack like dried parchment. Around his home, etched into his precious land, was a perfect ring of scorched earth, a dance ring. Desperate, the farmer sought the village Vrajitoare, a witch older than memory, whose cottage leaned like an old drunkard at the forest's edge. She took one look at him and shook her head. "You have angered the Yele," she muttered. "The beautiful ones now dance against you. Only the Kalusari can undo what you have invited into your home." And so they came, a band of men clothed in white, their sashes streaming red and gold, their staffs marked with ancient runes. They danced around the farmhouse, stamping the earth, striking their staffs in strange staccato rhythms. They tossed garlic, valerian, and absinthe into the air, casting nets of scent and song meant to unravel the unseen curse. For days they danced, until at last the mist lifted, the cows returned to graze, and the farmer's flesh ceased its withering. But the wheat never grew again, nor did any other seed sown by his hand. The Yele had not merely cursed the ground, they had cursed his very touch. The scorched ring remained forever around his home, a black scar etched into the heart of the land. For some scars, it seems, are not laid upon the body, but upon the very soul of the earth itself. There is a cost to every harvest, though we are not always wise enough to count it. Some believe they own the land because they work it, because they bleed into its soil, bend it to their will, and make it yield. But there are places where the earth does not belong to man, places guarded by older laws and older hands. The farmer's curse was not a punishment, it was a reckoning, a reminder that to take without reverence is to lose everything. So if ever you come across a meadow too perfect or a clearing too still, leave it be and walk away untouched, uncalled, and unseen. But the Yele are not creatures of hatred alone, nor do they strike always in anger. Sometimes they take from joy itself. They slip unseen amidst the songs of celebration, the laughter of lovers, the scent of wild flowers, and from these tender things they steal what they please. In Moldavia it is said that during the great feasts of Rusalim, when the fields are thick with dancers and the nights hum with music, the Yele are drawn to mortal celebrations, not to join them, but to claim something precious for their own. Here they are sometimes called the beautiful ones, other times the soimane, meaning hawk-like or falcon-like. Swift, silent, watchful, but no matter what they are called, they do not come to be welcomed, and if they find something they desire, they do not leave without it. For in our next tale, we discover why one must never leave a wedding fire unattended, never stray from the light of the village at night, for the beautiful ones watch from the shadows. This, dear friends, is the tale of a bride and of the song that stole her away. Once upon a time, in a quiet Moldavian village nestled between hills and the forest's edge, there was a wedding so joyous, so golden, that the old women said even the wildflowers seemed to bloom just for the occasion. The bride, Maria, was known not only for her beauty, radiant and effortless, but for her voice as well, sweet as honey, the villagers would say. While the groom, Dumitru, was strong and gentle, a man whose smile softened the eyes of mothers and made their daughters blush. They had been promised to each other since they were children, and their love had blossomed naturally over the years, patiently, like ivy wrapping itself around the walls of an old house. The wedding fell during the week of Rusalim, and though some muttered that it was an unlucky time, the young couple paid the old stories no mind. "We'll leave out flowers as our mothers did," Maria said with a smile, "and dance with joy, not fear." At long last the wedding day arrived, and the whole village gathered for the feast. Tables were laid with roast lamb and honey cakes, wine flowed freely. Children wove wreaths from daisies and danced barefoot through the grass. The musicians played until their fingers blistered, and still the guests cried for more. Maria and Dumitru danced together until they were breathless, spinning in circles beneath a canopy of lanterns. He kissed her cheek. She tucked a flower behind his ear. Laughter bloomed between them like spring wheat. So joyous was the entire village, no one noticed what happened next. Amid the revelry, beneath lantern light and lifted cups, something subtle began to shift. The laughter rang a little too sharp, the dancers' feet moved a little too fast, and somewhere behind it all, the wind began to breathe. A strange breeze crept into the wedding festival, not cool and refreshing, but damp and strange, as though drawn from deep cellars or open tombs. The lantern flames flickered. The musicians' rhythm faltered. It was then someone asked, "Where's the bride?" Dumitru turned, searching the crowd, but to no avail. There had been no scream, no cry, just an absence, quiet and absolute. Maria's garland lay on the table, her goblet still full, her seat empty. An old woman grasped his wrist. Her skin was paper-thin and shaking. "The woods!" she rasped. "She's gone to the woods." Dumitru ran, his boots pounding the dirt road, heart hammering like a drum. The sky was dark now, the stars scattered and cold. He passed the oak tree where villagers had tied red thread to ward off evil. The threads fluttered wildly in the wind, though the trees themselves did not sway. He ran past the last lantern and into the trees. As the forest swallowed him whole, dense and gnarled, its limbs knotted like clenched fists, its undergrowth thick with brambles that tugged at his legs and clawed at his skin. The path narrowed with every step, as though the trees themselves were pressing inward, trying to turn him back or trap him inside. But still he ran, driven by love and a sacred vow he'd made just hours before. On and on he stumbled through the darkness, until there in a moonlit clearing, near a moss-slicked spring, he found her. Maria stood barefoot in the grass, her gown damp with dew, her eyes wide and glassy. She danced, slowly, elegantly, her feet tracing patterns carved long ago by those who had danced before her, her limbs moving with a grace so precise it no longer seemed her own, like a marionette pulled by unseen hands. Surrounding her were 5 women, so pale they seemed carved from moonlight, their movements fluid and weightless, as if dancing under water. Their hair shimmered like mist. They sang in no tongue known to man, just melody, haunting and sweet. Dumitru could feel the temptation, coiling around him like a serpent, pulling him towards the circle. Struggling against their sweet allure, he called his wife's name, but she didn't hear. One of the Yele then turned to him, a soft smile playing at her lips, more curious than cruel. But the look alone was enough to stop his breath. Panic rising, Dumitru fumbled in his sash and pulled free the small clove of garlic his grandmother had insisted he carry. He pressed it to his chest, took a breath, and began to sing. It was a hymn, rough and off-key but pure, a child's lullaby to the Virgin, half remembered from his youth. The Yele paused, their heads turned in unison. Their steps slowed. Their music, once spellbinding, faltered like a forgotten name on the lips. And in that fragile moment, Dumitru lunged forward, grasped Maria's hand, and yanked her free of the circle. On and on they ran, until Maria's steps faltered, and she collapsed into the grass. Whether from exhaustion or the lingering pull of the Yele, none could say. Her eyes fluttered, slipping in and out of consciousness, as though caught within a dream she could not wake from. And so Dumitru gathered her into his arms, holding her close, her hair clinging to his chest like wet silk, and pressed forward through the dark. After what seemed an eternity, the trees began to thin, and there, flickering through the branches like distant stars, the lights of the village reappeared. That night a fire was rekindled in the square. The villagers prayed aloud, scattering salt and herbs across the threshold of every home. Maria survived mercifully, but something in her had changed. Her voice, once sweet, now held a tremble. Her eyes, once steady and bright, often drifted toward the tree line, as though listening for music no one else could hear. It was whispered she rose from bed in the dead of night to dance, barefoot, eyes half closed, swaying to a rhythm only she could hear, and when the wind rose through the valley, the villagers swore they could hear her humming softly, a tune that belonged to no wedding, no church, and no human mouth. Each year after, on the eve of Rusalim, the villagers held the Kalusari dance. They beat the ground with sticks, sang strange songs to confuse the spirits, and scattered wildflowers soaked in vinegar and ash, not for celebration, but in remembrance and in fear. As we come to a close on another tale, we are reminded that some stories do not end in death, but in something quieter, something stranger. A woman returned, but not untouched. You see, there are forces that do not need to steal your life to take something precious. Perhaps your laughter, perhaps your sleep. And when such things are taken, no feast nor prayer can bring them back. So when the drums sound and the garlands are laid, tread carefully, for you never know where the dance may take you. Not every soul who meets the Yele is met with malice. Sometimes you are tested first. A veiled stranger on the roadside, a whisper in the woods, a single moment to choose kindness or cruelty. And if you pass, if your heart is soft where others would harden, you may find yourself touched by something rare, a blessing, or perhaps a gift. But as we've seen time and again, a gift from the Yele is never simple. It carries conditions, spoken or not, and if broken, the punishment is swift. Our next tale takes us to a quiet valley, nestled beneath the Carpathians, where a young girl named Anka crossed paths with something ancient, hidden in a borrowed face. This is the story of the Yele's gift. There once was a young Roma girl named Anka who lived in a quiet valley tucked beneath the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains. Her family was poor, even by village standards. Their life was simple, their home a crooked little wagon lined with patched blankets, and their days were spent mending clothes, gathering herbs, and trading whatever they could to make it through the season. Yet Anka carried no bitterness in her heart. She was known for her gentle voice and ready smile, and when others hoarded or cursed the dry weather, she would share what little bread she had and offer water to passing travellers. She believed in the old ways, left offerings at the river, sang charms to the moon, as her grandmother had taught her before she passed. "Be kind, Anka," her grandmother would say, "especially to those who seem strange or low." One cool evening in late spring, just before the feast of Rusalim, Anka went to the river alone to fetch water. The sky was soft with twilight, and as she worked, she sang, low and sweet, a lullaby her grandmother once taught her, meant to soothe both babies and spirits alike. It was a humble offering, a note of kindness in the air. And the river listened. There, slumped near the reeds, she found an old woman, hunched and shivering in a shawl too thin for the weather. Her ankle was twisted, her face streaked with dirt, and her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper. "Please, help me." Others might have turned away, might have feared a trick, or simply claimed they had nothing to give, but not Anka. She knelt beside the woman, binding her ankle with a strip torn from her own skirt. She poured water from her jug into the old woman's palms. And when the woman trembled with cold, Anka draped her own shawl around her shoulders. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Anka said softly. "Come, I'll help you home." The old woman's gaze lingered on her for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a strange smile, not warm exactly, but wide, almost knowing, and in that moment the river shimmered. The reeds bent gently, yet not from any wind, but from something deeper, older. When Anka blinked, the crone was gone. The old woman's shawl slipped to the earth like shed skin, and in her place stood a radiant figure, tall, otherworldly, rising from the river as if born of its depths. Her hair cascaded in silken waves, clinging to her shoulders like wet ribbons, and her eyes sparkled with a pale argent light, like starlight in the night sky. Beautiful, cold, eternal. "You have shown kindness where others would show cruelty," the Yele said, "so I give you this." She reached into the folds of her gown and drew forth a small silver comb, etched with swirling patterns that shimmered even in shadow. "Use this on your crops come spring," she whispered, "and you shall never go hungry again." Then her voice lowered, soft as the river's breath. "But speak of this to no one, not your kin, not your priest, for what is given in silence must be kept in silence. Break that, and the gift will be your ruin." And with those final words she vanished. No wind, no footstep, only the scent of wild thyme lingering in the air. Anka rushed home, her heart aflutter from the wonder she had just witnessed. That spring, she went to the garden before dawn and gently combed the soil with the silver gift. She whispered no prayers, made no boasts, just touched the earth with reverence, as her grandmother had taught her. By midsummer, their once meager garden was transformed. Tomatoes blushed like jewels on the vine. Cucumbers curled fat and sweet, and the flax, tall and blue-flowered, supplied them with an abundance of linen yet to be woven. Even the herbs grew richer in scent and stronger in magic. Travellers came from neighbouring villages just to trade for Anka's vegetables and tinctures. As a result, her family's fortunes rose, but not all received the blessing with grace. There was one who watched with eyes filled with envy, Anka's sister, older, sharper, and far less kind. Where Anka gave freely, her sister hoarded. Where Anka whispered to rivers and left flowers at crossroads, her sister scoffed and spat. So when the fields burst golden beneath Anka's hands, when traders paid twice the price for her cloth, when the silver comb never dulled, never tangled, and shimmered like frost under the moon, the sister seethed, and envy, once planted, blossomed into folly. It was on one particular evening, hot and breathless, thick with the scent of summer, that Anka knelt down for prayer before bed and whispered thanks to God for the Yele's gift, unaware that her sister lay awake nearby, listening in silence. Jealousy bloomed like thistle in her chest. Later that night, Anka's sister crept out beneath a bruised sky. She carried no offerings, no bread, no milk, no flowers tied in red thread, only the silver comb stolen from Anka's chest while she slept. She went to the river, where the reeds still whispered with memory, and there, mocking the song Anka once sang, she called into the night. "I know you're there," she sneered. "I want what you gave her. I want more." But her demands were met with silence. Then a ripple, small, subtle, beneath the water's skin, broke the stillness as if something stirred below, and in its wake came a sudden stillness in the air. No frogs, no crickets, not even the wind. Then a sigh, low, bone deep, like the earth itself was displeased. The river darkened, and the reeds curled back as the comb in her hand crumbled. By morning the golden fields were blackened husks. The thread on Anka's loom snapped like spider silk. The cows gave no milk, the bees abandoned their hive, and the sister, found weeping in the fields, could speak but one word: forgive. Anka returned to the spring, heart heavy. She laid bread and flowers on the stone and sang the sweet song her grandmother had taught her. But the Yele did not answer. Over time, the forest, once restless with anger, grew quiet again, and the crops, while no longer magical, returned to their humble yield, always enough to feed her family, but never enough to prosper as before. From that day on, Anka lived simply, grateful for what remained. She never saw the Yele again, but sometimes, just as the sun slipped behind the mountains and the frogs began their song, she swore she heard soft footsteps in the leaves and caught the glimmer of a pair of silver eyes twinkling amidst the trees. And so ends the tale of the Yele's gift, and of Anka, the girl whose kindness stirred something sacred, and who was given more than mere silver for her grace. As we have seen tonight, the Yele do not give lightly. Even a blessing, if mishandled, can become a burden. Even a gift, if shared too freely, can bloom into regret. So let us remember, generosity is noble, but it must be carried humbly and guarded well, for in the old places even miracles must be tended with care. There are places in this world not haunted by what lingers in the dark, but by what vanishes without a sound. Time, memory, the quiet unraveling of the mind. Deep within the heart of Transylvania, there is a forest just outside the city of Cluj-Napoca, where even the bravest rarely tread alone. It is a place where the trees grow in strange spirals and crooked angles. Animals avoid its heart, and deep within there is a clearing so perfectly round, so eerily barren, not even the moss dare take root. This is the Hoia Baciu forest, and it has long been rumored to be Romania's Bermuda Triangle. For many years, researchers have tried to explain it. Magnetic fields, carbon pockets, neurological tricks. But this forest does not give up its secrets so easily. Photographs have captured glowing figures flitting through its trees. Some who enter speak of sudden nausea, of vertigo that twists the world sideways as if the forest itself resents their presence. However, long before it drew the curious and the paranormal obsessed, it held an older legend. It begins with a shepherd, Baciu as he was called, who vanished into the forest with 200 sheep and was never seen again. No tracks, no bones, no sound, just gone. Vanished into the very same forest that bears his name to this day. Some say that was when the forest changed. Others say it had been that way long before men began naming things. And of course, in such a place, the Yele are said to dance, not in sun-dappled meadows, but beneath moonless skies where silence feels alive, like something with teeth. In our next tale, we follow in the footsteps of Vasile, a schoolteacher with a mind full of science and the heart of a skeptic, the sort who scoffed at local legends and believed every mystery had a rational answer. That is, of course, until the day he entered the Hoia Baciu. Many years ago, Vasile had come to Cluj to teach chemistry at the university. He was the kind of man who trusted what could be measured through a microscope, not glimpsed in the shifting shape of clouds, more at home with formulas than folklore. He loved books, not stories, papers, not gossip from old peasant women. So when he first heard of the forest called Hoia Baciu, of its strange clearing and its eerie reputation, he smiled politely and said, "You can't frighten a man with fairy tales." But there was something peculiar in the way the locals went quiet at the name, something that made him pause, just long enough to ignite an ember of curiosity in his otherwise rational mind. And so he decided to see it for himself. It was late afternoon when he reached the edge of the forest. Though the moment his boots crossed beneath the first bough, the light already felt wrong. Dimmer, tinged with green. The path soon narrowed sharply, swallowed by bramble and pine, until it felt less like walking a trail and more like slipping down the gullet of some savage beast. The deeper he went, the more the world around him unraveled. Sounds grew thick and muffled, like they were being smothered just beyond his hearing. His footsteps dulled. The songs of birds vanished. Even the breeze abandoned him. The air pressed close around him, damp and heavy, as if the trees themselves were leaning in, waiting, watching. The scent of old moss and something sour seemed to cling to the back of his throat. The forest felt still, yes, but not silent, as though it was listening, and then so faint he almost missed it. The sound of bells, tiny, delicate and distant, like silver chimes on the breeze. They called to him softly, rhythmically, like a memory rising from deep water. And Vasile, as if pulled by threads unseen, stepped off the path. It was only a few steps, just to look, just to satisfy his curiosity. But within moments the trail behind him was gone. The trees around him were gnarled and unfamiliar, and then came the clearing, a perfect circle flattened, lifeless, ringed by trees that leaned back ever so slightly as though recoiling from something that could not be seen. Vasily stepped into the clearing without hesitation, the faint drifting bells falling silent the moment his foot crossed the threshold. He paused. The clearing was perfectly round, just as described to him, and yet it seemed painfully ordinary, just a patch of earth, plain, unremarkable. There were no strange lights, no signs of ritual or ruin, just dry, flattened grass and a few lichen-covered stones, all bathed in the golden light of the midday sun. His brow furrowed. He took out a small notebook, jotted a few observations in a tight, practiced hand, and seated himself on a stone near the center, waiting, watching. The forest loomed beyond the ring like a wall of shadow, but nothing stirred, not even the wind. "Nothing but superstition," he muttered aloud. As he turned back to his notes, something shifted. The light hadn't changed. Not exactly, but it shimmered soft and strange, as though a veil had been drawn between Vasily and the world, like heat rippling above pavement, though the air remained cool. The hairs on his arms prickled. He scribbled down his thoughts, half-focused, something about the clearing symmetry, the eerie silence, when he heard it again. The bells, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Delicate chimes drifting like wind through glass. He froze, pen hovering mid-word. The sound grew louder, not in volume, but in presence, as if it were drawing closer through the air itself. Then came the laughter, soft, breathless, not cruel, but amused, like a private joke whispered just behind the ear. Too close for comfort. He looked up, and they were there, 3 women, or something like women. They moved in a circle around him, just beyond the ring of flattened grass. Their gowns shimmered with the color of moonlit water. Their hair floated behind them like smoke, trailing in elegant ribbons that defied gravity. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, as though carved from frost. Their feet glided silently over the ground, yet the bells at their ankles sang with every step, high, sweet, and strangely mournful. Their faces were serene, distant, and their eyes gleamed silver, not bright, not glowing, but deep, like starlight caught beneath still water. They said nothing, but their silence pulled at him, soft and insistent like the tide around a drowning man. Vasily could only stare, breath shallow, heart racing, unsure if his body still belonged to him. It wasn't fear he felt, and it wasn't desire. It was something older, primordial, a pull from the bones, not the heart, as though some forgotten part of him recognized them and longed to follow. Vasily couldn't tell when they began to draw closer. One moment they were circling the edge of the clearing. The next, they were mere steps away, close enough for him to see the tiny silver bells strung around their ankles, tied with red thread, swaying with each step like charms against some forgotten curse. He felt the world tilt, gently as if gravity had shifted by some imperceptible degree. The clearing blurred around the edges. The notebook slipped from his fingers, falling silently to the earth. One of the Yele turned her head just slightly and met his gaze. Her expression was unreadable. A soft smile played at her lips, more curious than cruel, and the look alone was enough to stop his breath. She did not speak, but in his mind he heard a soft voice. "Dance with us." And so he did, not with his body, no, not yet, but something within him stepped forward and yielded. The circle of women swayed, their arms floated like willow branches in the breeze. Their feet barely touched the earth. Time itself seemed to stretch thin, like glass heated to the edge of breaking. The sky above bent sideways, and the clearing pulsed with light as the rhythm of the bells seeped into his bones. Vasile tried to take a step back, to blink, to breathe, but he couldn't remember how. It was as though his soul had come loose, unspooling like thread from a bobbin, yet still clinging, desperate to remain tethered, glittering, slow, hovering just above him as if caught between staying and slipping away. The Yele danced faster. The bells quickened. Their laughter returned, soft, melodic, and sharp enough to cut. And Vasile let go. The choice was no longer his. It had slipped through his fingers, like mist, like memory, like a dream you don't realize you've left until you wake. How long he remained in that circle, Vasile could not say. Minutes, perhaps even hours. Time had lost its meaning, stretched and thinned until it was little more than a feeling, like a face in the crowd you can't quite place. Then, suddenly, the bells stopped, the laughter ceased, and the clearing was empty, though a faint, smouldering circle now marked the ground where the Yele had danced. He was on his knees in the grass, his palms pressed into the cold earth, his lungs burning. The sky above had darkened completely. Stars blinked through the canopy where moments before the sun had hung at the horizon. He tried to rise, but nearly collapsed. His legs trembled, his breath came shallow. The world tilted like a boat on uneasy waters, and somewhere nearby, faint but unmistakable, something giggled. Vasile turned and ran. Branches clawed at his coat, roots tangled at his feet, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop, fleeing the clearing as though the devil himself were behind him. By the time he reached the forest's edge, the horizon was blooming with the soft grey light of dawn. His legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, mud on his hands, mist in his lungs, and something cold clinging to the back of his mind. They found him the next morning, curled near a crossroad, soaked in dew and covered in fine scratches. His notebook was gone, his watch was broken, and he spoke in fragments, disjointed thoughts about silver eyes and songs without words and feet that didn't quite touch the ground. He'd been missing for 5 days. The doctors could find nothing wrong, no injury, no fever, just disorientation and a blank space in his memory. But Vasile was never quite the same. He began to suffer spells, sudden bouts of vertigo, where the world spun and pulsed, and strange dreams that left him gasping awake, dreams of circular paths, of figures just at the edge of his vision, of laughter echoing deep within his bones. Word of the event spread, and it was then that the old women in town, the same ones Vasile had once dismissed with polite scoffs, offered another solution. A Kalusari troupe was brought in from a neighboring village to provide aid. They danced around him, chanting in breathless rhythm, the tips of their absinthe-soaked branches brushing the air with every step. Their feet struck the earth in sharp, deliberate patterns meant not to entertain, but to cleanse, to banish, to protect. And whether by faith or folklore it helped. The dreams never fully stopped, but the spells grew less frequent. Vasile returned to teaching, though quieter now and less certain of the world he thought he knew. And he never again laughed at the old stories. It is said that on certain nights, particularly around Rusalim, he could still be seen standing alone at the edge of the forest, head tilted just so as if listening. listening for the whisper of feet adorned with silver bells, brushing against scorched earth. You see, dear friends, Vasile did not trespass out of cruelty nor out of arrogance exactly, only certainty, a certainty that the world could be measured, mapped, and held to reason. That what could not be seen or touched simply could not be real. But some truths do not live on charts. Some forces slip through microscopes like moonlight through a keyhole. And as for the Yele, they are not something to be studied, but to be respected. Vasile's fate was not a punishment, no. The Yele did not harm him, nor did they curse him. They simply showed him something his mind could not hold, and in doing so they left behind a man changed, not broken, but softened, a little more careful, a little more quiet, and perhaps in that there is a kind of mercy. For the greatest danger is not always in what the other world does to us, but in what it asks of us, and what we are forced to become once we've seen beyond the veil. So remember, dear Vasile, and tread lightly should you ever find yourself in a place not found on any map. For those who wander into such places rarely return unchanged, and some never fully return at all. Some tales are old, older than maps, older than myth, so old, in fact, that their beginnings have been lost to time, but still beg to be told, deep in the folds of Romania's past, when the old gods still listened and the forests held their own laws, there lived 3 sisters, royal, radiant, and doomed. Their laughter once echoed through palace halls, and their beauty was rivaled only by their arrogance. They feared no spirit, no curse, no god. But pride, as we've learned, rarely ends in peace. What became of them is whispered still by the trees, sung by springs too sacred to touch. And though the years have turned to centuries, the curse remains. So gather close, dear friends, for our final tale. Once upon a time, there was a village nestled at the edge of an old forest, not far from a cave the locals never dared approach. They said it was cursed, that the ground around it was barren. Birds would not nest in the twisted trees that grew near its mouth, and beasts refused to drink from the spring that trickled nearby, clear as glass, they said, and twice as cold. Children were told never to play too close. Hunters never followed game in that direction. And every year, when the wild roses bloomed too early, it was taken as an omen, and wild flowers and garlic would be left at the cave's edge, just in case. For the elders remembered, and they spoke the name quietly. The daughters of Rusalim. Long ago, in a kingdom lost to time, there lived 3 sisters of beauty and power, daughters of a pagan emperor whose name has faded like worn stone beneath the rain. Their father was a king of iron and pride who bowed to no god, and from him his daughters learned disdain. Where others feared the divine, they scoffed. Where others gave offerings, they rolled their eyes and turned away. One night, in a glade where moonlight wept through the trees, the sisters found a hidden spring. Izvorul, the spring of the moon, it shimmered with a silver light said to be sacred to Bendis, the old Dacian goddess of the moon. Its waters were holy, whispered the elders, meant only for the purest hearts, the humblest hands. Those who approached brought gifts, herbs wrapped in silk, coins buried in tribute, and prayers offered in reverence, marked by ribbons swaying in the trees. But the sisters brought only laughter and pride. Wrapped in silk and decadence, they mocked the rites and drank deeply from the spring, one after another, their voices rising in cruel delight. "Let the goddess see our beauty and bow to us," one is said to have scoffed. But Bendis did not bow. Her wrath was swift and silent. Moonlight thickened like spilled milk. The air grew heavy, pressed close, like a breath held too long. And as for the sisters vanished into the woods, never to be seen in daylight again. Only at night were they seen, shapes that glided beneath the trees, pale as moonlight on water. Over the centuries, the old kingdom crumbled to dust, and the tale of the sisters faded into whispered warnings. But the village near the spring endured, and in it lived two brothers, Matei and Yonel. Matei the elder was quiet, careful, and steady-handed with a bow, while Yonel was younger by 5 years, broad-shouldered, quick with a joke, and newly betrothed to the baker's daughter, Anna. He was proud, happy, in love with life and all the promises his future held. But pride has weight, and happiness can be loud, loud enough to attract the unwelcome. Yonel had heard the stories about the sisters. Every child in the village had, but he never gave them much thought. And so, on the second day of Rusali, while chasing a beautiful white stag through the southern woods, he strayed too close to the forbidden cave and vanished. His dog returned, panting and limping. His quiver was found soon thereafter, half buried in moss. But there was no sign of Yonel, only strange hoof-prints, silver-edged, leading toward the cave. The village elders refused to speak of it, while the old women crossed themselves and began to whisper. Resolved to find his brother, Matei went searching at first light the next day. The sky was grey, overcast, its light thin and brittle as bone. Mist curled low along the ground, trailing between the trees like spilled cream. The forest somehow felt older than it had the day before. The path grew narrow, swallowed by undergrowth and shadow. Though the wind stirred the canopy high above, the trees beneath barely moved, their trunks rigid and close, as if bracing for something, or hiding it. The air had weight to it, damp and cold. Even the birds had gone quiet. Then he heard it. Not footsteps, not an animal's cry, but singing, not in words, just melody, winding, hollow, sweet enough to make his chest ache, a tune that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The kind of sound that doesn't reach the ears first, but seeps into the spine. He followed the sound, his breath catching, heart pounding against his ribs like a warning drum. Suddenly the trees thinned without warning, the mist pulling back like a curtain, and there, bathed in a cold silvery light, was the clearing beside the cave. The spring at its center shimmered like glass, unnaturally still, and around it, moving in perfect silence, were 3 women. They circled the water barefoot, their steps so light they seemed to hover above the ground. Their skin was pale as birch bark, untouched by sun. Their gowns clung and shimmered like morning frost, translucent, glistening, as if woven from dew and moonlight. Their hair flowed behind them in long, weightless ribbons, swaying as if beneath water, though no wind stirred. and they danced, not joyfully, not playfully, but with a slow, measured grace. It was a dance older than language, a ritual, a spell, and in the center of their circle stood Yonel. His face was slack, eyes wide and glassy, reflecting nothing. His mouth hung open as if he were still trying to form a word he'd long forgotten. His feet moved, slowly, steadily, but not by his own will. They dragged along the same worn path again and again, tracing a spiral of madness in the damp earth, with clumsy, trembling steps. Blood seeped from where the stones had torn through his soles, leaving red kisses in the dirt behind him. He did not cry out, he did not weep, he just danced. "Yonel!" Matej shouted, but the sound of his voice fell flat, swallowed by the clearing like a stone dropped into deep water. He heard no echo, no reply, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. The women didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't see him, but they smiled, and then their smiles deepened, slow and knowing. It was as if they had always known he would come, as if they had been waiting all along. Matej took one step forward, then another. The air thickened heavy around him, pressing at his chest like a cold, damp hand. And in the deepest part of him, beneath the fear, beneath the panic, he felt it. He would not leave this place if he stayed another moment longer, so he turned and he ran. Back in the village, Matej begged for help. He went first to the priest, who tightened his lips and clutched his cross but said nothing, then to the mayor, who shook his head and muttered something about bad ground and worse omens. Even the old women, those who whispered old charms into their tea, would not meet his eyes. No one dared go near the cave. But one name was spoken. Not aloud, but under breath or behind doors barely cracked. The Solomonaire. They said he was a weather worker, a wizard of some sorts and speaker to storms. He was old. How old, none could say. Even the oldest of the elders could not remember him as a young man. Mad, some whispered. Cursed, said others. He lived alone in a crooked tower past the ridge, where lightning had struck the same tree 3 times. The path to his door was overgrown, the stones scattered with animal bones and bits of red string. The villagers called him a strigat, touched, not right in the head, but still they feared him, which meant they believed. That evening Matej climbed to his tower at dusk, and the Solomonaire listened. He did not interrupt, he did not blink, and when Matej's voice broke, when he could say no more, the old man nodded once and replied, his voice rasping like wind through a crypt. "He's not lost yet," he said, "but they have begun to take him." That night, under a waning moon, the Solomonaire arrived at the clearing, with Matej trailing behind like a boy too frightened to disobey. The Solomonaire wore a tattered coat of indigo wool, its seams stitched with copper thread. Around his neck hung a necklace of red beads, teeth, and dried garlic skins. Upon his head a horse's skull, carved with spirals and sigils that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. In one hand he carried a satchel of salt, valerian, and ash from that thrice-struck tree. In the other a bowl of black water, so dark it seemed to drink the starlight. And there in the center of the clearing they saw him, Yonel, still dancing. His limbs moved with that same unnatural rhythm, tracing the same circle over and over. His eyes were glassy, his feet raw. Blood darkened the ground beneath him, Mate surged forward, a cry already rising in his throat. But a hand seized his shoulder. "Not yet," the Solomonaire murmured. "If you step into that ring now, they'll take you too." The forest creaked, the air thickened, and so, heart pounding and fists clenched, Mate stood still, and the old man began his work. He stepped into the clearing and began to draw a wide circle in the dirt, murmuring strange words beneath his breath. Then he poured the ash, then the salt, then the valerian, and finally he lit the fire. The flames crackled, not gold or orange, but green laced with blue. And as the line of fire closed, the Yele emerged one by one, stepping from the shadows with eyes that held no warmth. Already they were circling him, graceful, silent and watching, their eyes reflecting the firelight with a shimmer that was not quite human. And when the Solomonaire began to chant, the forest stilled. The Yele, however, did not flee. They did not scream, but their dance slowed. Their feet, once light as whispers, now dragged through the earth as though reluctant to leave their mark. The shimmer of their forms dimmed, blurring at the edges like mist unraveling at dawn. Then they were gone, not with a cry, not with a gust or flame, but with a hush, like breath vanishing into cold air. And then Yonel crumpled as though the strings had been cut. The next morning, back in their village, Yonel opened his eyes. For a long time he could not speak, and when his voice finally returned, it was softer, quieter than before. He never again raised a bow or dared walk alone in the woods. Sometimes he would laugh at nothing. Other times he wept in his sleep, but he was alive. And as for Mate, he never told anyone what he had almost done. How close he had come to stepping into the circle, how close he had come to following the Yele's song himself, and so every year on the night before Rusalim, the villagers still leave offerings at the mouth of the cave. Milk, garlic, wild thyme, and coins wrapped in red thread, not to honor the daughters of Rusalim, but to plead softly, solemnly in the old way, "Dance without us." There is a certain sorrow in tales like this one, not of death, but of transformation, of men who venture too close to the other side and never fully return. Yonel was not destroyed, no, but neither was he saved, not truly. He returned from the woods, but not as the man who entered them. And those who knew him best could never quite decide whether he had escaped the Yele's spell or simply learned to live beside it. For the Solomonaire's ritual may have broken the circle, but some dances, I suspect, never truly end. Before we conclude tonight's tales, there is something we would quietly invite you to consider. SkaryTales has a home beyond YouTube. You may now discover us on Patreon as well. There, within the Rook's Court, you'll find early ad-free access to each new tale, exclusive fairy tales every month, released only for our patrons, rare images and artwork never before seen, and if you are so inclined, even the opportunity to feature in one of our stories, perhaps as a shimmering fae, a brooding dwarf, or a wandering knight lost in legend. If you have found comfort in the dark corners of our stories, if the strange and the sacred speak to you, consider joining us. Your support helps these forgotten tales stay alive and opens the door to many more yet to come. You'll find the link in the description below. We would be honored to welcome you to the court. And so ends part one of our journey into the world of the Yele, where beauty walks hand in hand with danger, and whispers in the woods carry an invitation you cannot refuse. Tonight we've seen what becomes of shepherds who step into circles they do not understand, of brides who vanish into the arms of the unseen, and of men who return home changed, their heads filled with a rhythm only they can hear. We here at Scary Tales would like to offer a special thank you to Dr. Alina Popescu for introducing us to these haunting and beautiful figures from Romanian folklore. Her guidance helped us step into the circle and return with stories worth telling, but there is more still to come. In part 2, we will follow the Yele into deeper woods and darker hearts, where vengeance takes root, where pacts are made beside cursed rivers, and where the line between blessing and curse becomes nearly invisible. Until then, my friends, remember this. Not all spirits howl in the night. Some sing, and should you hear them, do not answer, for the Yele are always listening. My dear friends, our tale for this evening has concluded, but our journey does not end here. Visit us again soon. Here in our little corner of the ether, we shall unravel another tale. A story imbued with fear, superstition, and perhaps the occasional sprinkle of fairy dust. We hope you enjoyed tonight's story. Join us again as we delve into the pages of history, folklore, and some things that make us wonder, and perhaps others that make us shudder. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to Scary Tales. We're a small channel, but with your help, we'll continue to grow. Together, we'll explore the shadows and the light of the world's most enchanting and terrifying tales. And if you'd like to follow our journey beyond the realm of YouTube, be sure to check out our new page on X. The link is in the description. There, we'll share more dark wonders, eerie discoveries, and glimpses behind the scenes of Scary Tales. And for those who truly dare to bring the strange and spectral into their world, keep a watchful eye. The Scary Tales attic has arrived. There you'll find an ever-growing collection of eerie delights, including haunting art prints and enchanted apparel. Each item crafted with a touch of folklore, a hint of shadow and a flicker of the uncanny. So whether you seek to adorn your walls or yourself with enchanted fairies or figures from tales of old, the attic is where your collection begins. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the veil of the unknown, where the mysteries of folklore and the enchantments of the past await. In these tales we find that the most profound magic often lies not in the glitter of fairy dust, but in the shadows that dance just beyond the edge of our understanding. So until then, sleep well and good night.